The diner won't provide the man food. Next day, he turns up in uniform. After 45 minutes of waiting in line, Baker was informed that she was unable to service him and refused to provide an explanation. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. It was rare for someone to defy him and give him the impression that they were in charge. He realized his authority would be useless in this situation. She must not have known who he was. He was looking forward to seeing her expression when she recognized who she was dealing with. He was all set for his vacation day. He wanted nothing more than to sit down and unwind for a day after working 12-hour shifts straight. Alexandrian Carl Baker only needed a vacation. He had prepared this day quite well. Eating out and sleeping in were two of the most essential items on the schedule. He would also walk outside and enjoy the sunshine and clean air. Then he'd watch TV and crack open a cold one come nightfall. Baker was startled awake by his dog leaping on him. He saw the sun coming through the drapes when he opened one eye. It was already beyond 12. Grinning, he dressed. While preparing his own coffee, he considered the next item on the schedule. He gave it some thinking and went to the neighborhood diner. It was somewhere he had never had time to visit. Apparently, though, the meal was excellent. He had no idea how much he would regret getting there. He was staring at with shady stares from others. Someone hadn't given him that kind of gaze in a long time. Usually, people regarded him a little differently when he was in his job uniform, but in this case, nobody knew who he was. Baker entered the restaurant and moved to the rear of the queue. As he waited, he could feel his appetite rising. He made up his mind after taking a peek at the menu. The minutes ticked past. He made his selections from the menu, focusing on only 2 items. Despite all of his wonderful traits, he has particular tastes in cuisine. He had thus anticipated that the meal at the restaurant would live up to his expectations. He reasoned that the 45 minutes he would have to stand in line for his supper would be well worth it. He was erroneous, though. He could be patient when necessary, even when the wait seemed much longer than he'd expected. But after only a short period, his patience would begin to run thin. At last, Baker had reached the front of the line and was prepared to place his meal order and take a seat. But he would turn scarlet at what came next. Grinning, Baker greeted the woman working behind the counter. She gave him a frustrated expression as she glanced back at him. She was clearly not having a good start to the day because she was preoccupied with chewing gum. He dismissed it with a smile on his face and asked for what he wanted. Maybe if she adopted his mentality, Baker reasoned, she might get better. He was certain that he could be of assistance. He placed his order for the meal he had chosen, but to his dismay, he heard her inform him that it was not available. Though taken aback, he continued to follow his backup plan. She shook her head once again when he asked for the other order. Baker felt his frustration building. They hadn't even served him his meal after he had been waiting for 45 minutes. He was able to see the order under the special section of the menu. Had he known right away that the food he desired was unavailable, he would never have bothered to go. He was also growing weary of her bad attitude. He questioned what they really had and said that they would take it from there, keeping his fury to himself. She gave him a contemptuous look, as though to suggest that he was a moron for posing such a question. Her lack of menu selections and her bad attitude were starting to get to him a little too much, he felt. He had to express his opinions. "That's it," Baker concluded. "Can I speak to your manager?" he said coolly, remaining still. She moved aside and called out to the kitchen in the rear without saying anything. She stared blankly back at Baker, and a lady answered her summons by emerging. After glancing at Baker, she turned to face the queue behind him. "Sir, what's the issue here? Now you're supporting the folks in your wake." Baker could see where the employee's attitude originated. This was not going to be fun, he realized. He told her what happened and how management should address the issue, ignoring the derogatory implication that he was the source of these absurd statements. He felt his fury boil at her remark. To the manager's amazement, a female cook then appeared at the register and said, "You better pull me off the line because I'm not serving him," pointing to Baker. This was undoubtedly inappropriate conduct on the part of her employees. Baker waited for the manager to move, but she started giggling. Baker calmly and collectedly warned them that there would be consequences if they did not improve the way they treated their clients. She did not appreciate his guidance as Baker had expected. "I know that today wasn't how you had hoped, sir, but that's just how life works. Right now, will you please leave my establishment?" She snarled, "I don't serve men like you." "Men like me?" Baker gave an astonished response. By men like him, what did she mean? Baker was done. He had had enough of being Mr. Nice Guy. He informed her that he was speaking out for her own benefit and restated his reason for speaking with her in a more authoritative tone. He now insisted that she clarify her meaning when she said that guys like him. But the next thing she did would dispel any doubt about revenge from his mind. She seemed belligerent and cold-blooded. "I don't have to justify my intentions to anyone. Before you make a disturbance, you out now," she angrily said. Baker was flushed. He was not accustomed to people looking down on him, nor was he used to people defying him like this. Nobody ought to be. She obviously didn't know who he was or the extent of the power at his disposal. This confirmed his frequent belief that stepping out of uniform was a great way to get a true sense of people. Baker could see she was not going to behave like a grown-up when speaking to him. When others started to notice, he felt totally degraded and mocked. He surveyed the room, taking in every set of eyes and ears focused on him. Realizing nearly everyone in the diner was staring at him, his cheeks went hot. Though he didn't recognize anyone there, he was curious whether any of the patrons did. Had they most likely would not have believed that any diner would have the audacity to treat him in such a manner. Baker had nothing else to say and walked out of the diner. Their actions infuriated, and embarrassed him. He could not allow them to go unpunished. He was going to go past the upsetting beginning of his day and come back tomorrow to deal with this experience in the uniform that reminds him to treat and serve everyone with respect. Then, how would they respond? Baker wore his chief of police outfit and reported for duty the next day. After his day off, he had a lot to catch up on. Though he was busy, he had already made a self-promise to contact the diner and reveal his true identity. He was eager to witness their trembling in their boots. And they actually did. While returning from a field call, Baker made a stop at the diner. Having been fortunate enough to locate a parking spot, he drew his cruiser up just outside and rushed through the doors. He had a serious expression. The diner was filled with the atmosphere of his presence. Baker was a big, wide man who gave off an air of power while he was wearing his uniform. Now he was the center of attention for everyone. They greeted him with respect and smiles. All the employees' expressions brightened up at once, even the cashier, who was now much more focused. Her grin of welcome gradually vanished as soon as she realized who he was. He asked for the manager, letting go of niceties. The cashier called for the manager in an insincere manner, but this time she went to the kitchen door in the rear and called. She appeared to be being polite now. Baker stood clutching a radio gadget in one hand and his belt in the other. He certainly had the right appearance, especially when his radio beeped out updates from the officers. He bided his time till she emerged. But a different manager was in charge today, and she apologized right away after learning what Baker had told her. She also promised to start an internal inquiry into her co-workers' actions. Soon after, witnesses' posts on social media criticizing the officers' subpar performance spread the word about the incident. The eatery was now compelled to make a statement. When questioned about the staff's terrible conduct of the police, a dining representative didn't attempt to refute the allegations. She told reporters that everything had transpired precisely as Baker had recounted. The restaurant expressed shock at the extreme disrespect displayed to a law enforcement official and pledged to investigate the incident further. Would it, however, be sufficient? They expect the best moral standards both personally and professionally from their team members, according to a public statement. We are dedicated to treating everyone with respect and decency because we cherish each and every one of our visitors. Discrimination in any form is not acceptable to us. To investigate and settle this issue as soon as possible, we are collaborating with the relevant authorities and members of the local police association, the statement continued. We have attempted to contact the concerned police officer, but we have not yet had a conversation with him. After this evaluation is over, we'll keep investigating the matter and take the necessary measures. The people was incensed as the news swiftly spread on Facebook and Twitter. Despite the establishment's haste to maintain its composure, locals in Alexandria attacked the restaurant, threatening to boycott them until the guilty persons were prosecuted. In the community, Baker is revered as a hero, particularly for his many years of selfless devotion and kindness. Although the eatery was the target of some rather harsh remarks on Facebook, Baker wished to remain silent about the matter. His primary goal was to bring those responsible to justice and return to making sure that everyone, police officer or not, was treated with dignity. He left his wife penniless, so when he came back 4 years later, he wasn't prepared for this. Many would describe Caleb Jones's life as idyllic. He had a well-paying job, a nice-sized house, and a stunning wife to return home to. His goal had been to become the ideal nuclear family, which he had been raised to feel would indicate that he had fulfilled all of his life's ambitions. It would not be long until his wife, Annette, wanted a child, given how long they had been married. Annette was a homemaker in every sense of the word. She was unemployed. Since Caleb's job paid enough, they didn't require a second source of money in order to get by. This implied that she could do with her days what she wanted. At first, Caleb didn't mind that Annette was doing this. In fact, he was overjoyed that he could support his wife. However, he quickly discovered that he was becoming extremely resentful of Annette. How come she can do what she wants while I have to slave away at work? He noticed that he was thinking more and more, but the man attempted to push these ideas from his mind and just move on with his life because he loved Annette so much. Ultimately, it wasn't as though Annette didn't assist him throughout his absence from work. Whenever he returned from work, she always made sure the home was clean and dinner was ready. He had never eaten better meals than those prepared by Annette, in fact. Caleb even believed they would sell well at a restaurant because they were so tasty. Things went on as usual for the following several months, but Annette started to detect something strange. Over those few months, Caleb's demeanor and attitude had become worse on a consistent basis. He smelled like beer and was arriving home late from work. Furthermore to that, he was quite irritable, and anything the woman said or did that he didn't like might make him lose it. Generally speaking, Annette would tiptoe around Caleb in the hopes that she wouldn't enrage him because it would only result in hour-long disputes. But then one day, everything started to go south. The day had begun as any other. Since it was their anniversary and Caleb had gone for his job at the factory, Annette spent the first part of the morning cleaning the home and making sure she had everything she needed to prepare Caleb's favorite supper. After finishing all of those things, Annette had an afternoon to herself. For some time now, she'd been wanting to get some new outfits for Caleb and for herself. In an attempt to lighten his mood for the evening, she also wanted to pick him up an anniversary present. After spending several hours outside the house at the shop, the woman returned to find something she never would have predicted had happened. Later that afternoon, Annette returned home to find, to her surprise, that Caleb had returned and was comfortably curled up on the couch. However, the fact that he had many empty beer bottles next to him worried her. "How on earth have you been? Off squandering my funds once more?" Annette was shouted at by Caleb. The woman was hearing things that she couldn't believe. Because she needed to utilize the money he provided her to go out, Caleb was behaving as though she had done something wrong. Annette first attempted to defuse the situation by telling Caleb that she had just gone out to pick up some new clothing and a lovely gift for their anniversary, but her husband was too inebriated and consumed by his rage to hear her out. Without delay, Caleb started accusing his wife of robbing him and worse, of having an extramarital affair. Annette started defending herself right away since she could no longer take his awful hate speech. Caleb was surprised at how upset she was with him for the first time in a long time. This was not the way they had argued in the past. No, this was even worse. Annette ended up telling Caleb precisely how she had been feeling for the past 3 months because she was so enraged and tired of him. The woman informed Caleb that she was weary of his mean-spirited and generally awful conduct, and that she was tired of having to watch what she said around him. Once he got over his amazement, Caleb realized he was getting just as mad with Annette as he was. The cynical guy yelled at his wife, complaining that he was tired of being the only one who had to go to work while she was free to pursue her interests and have a carefree life. Annette was hearing things that she couldn't believe. She didn't need to work since he could take care of everything, he had said, and now he was venting his frustration on her. Caleb went into the hallway and informed Annette he'd had enough before she could remind her husband that it had been his choice for her to not work. He wanted Annette to go because he was tired of the life he was living and wanted to start pursuing his own goals in life. Annette was stunned and immobile. Was Caleb being serious? Was he actually throwing her out? When the woman questioned him about whether he really wanted her to go, Caleb said that he did. Annette nodded all right, recognizing there was no use in attempting to talk him out of it and that she really didn't want to be with him now that he had turned into such a bad guy. After that, she quietly made her way upstairs, packed a bag with her belongings, and left the home. On her way out, Caleb had informed her that he would not be helping her find a new place to live. This time, she would have to find a job if she wanted to buy herself anything. After giving Annette his last speech, Caleb closed the door behind her and observed her as she left through the window. Annette pretended not to worry, but she was actually in a deep fear. The clothing on her back and a little bag of belongings were all that her spouse, who is now her ex-husband, had left her with. However, she was not going to let it deter her. Annette chose to phone her mother instead and requested to be with her as she tried to get back on her feet. A strategy was slowly taking shape in her thoughts, but it would take some time to completely implement. After 4 years, Caleb had come to despise them all. He first believed that he was going to live the life he had always imagined. He would spend his money on the things he desired because he was now free and unmarried. He could take a trip, go on a few casual dates, and generally enjoy himself. He could do everything he could dream of. The issue was that while going alone, he found it dull. He'd always had Annette to go on adventures with, but now that she was gone, he had no one to go on adventurous activities or take in the breathtaking scenery with. In addition, he discovered that whenever he went on a date, he couldn't help but compare every woman to Annette. Did they look as good as his wife? Were they as wise, as kind, or as funny? Caleb was obsessed with her and couldn't get her out of his head no matter what. Caleb had attempted to get in touch with Annette to see if she would be interested in resuming their marriage following that first year of being independent. However, the young lady was nowhere to be seen when he went to see her mother, and her mother was most certainly not going to tell him where she had disappeared. Rather, Caleb was allowed to continue living his life precisely as he had previously, but without the daily support of a devoted wife. Caleb made the decision to spend a few days in the city during one of his days off in order to escape his routine existence. Even though the metropolis was many hours away from his village, he felt that he deserved to spoil himself. The man chose to eat at a neighborhood eatery after arriving in the city. He had read excellent reviews about it, and he was eager to give it a try. The restaurant was heavily booked, so Caleb was relieved to finally snag a table and enjoy his lunch. He wanted to thank the chef, so in the end, he asked if he might see them. But he was taken aback when the individual left. Annette was the restaurant's chef. The woman hesitated to approach Caleb the instant she spotted him. But after a little moment, she inhaled deeply and approached him. It was unbelievable to Caleb that his wife was a star chef at a prestigious restaurant. After praising her food, Caleb started to inquire about the possibility of them dating again. Annette, nevertheless, informed him that she was content with her new life. She was more concerned with realizing her goals than dating since she had prepared for a very long time to get to this point. Caleb gave a resigned nod. Even though he was aware at the time that letting Annette leave had been the worst decision of his life, he wasn't going to wreck her life once again. After bidding her farewell, he left the restaurant determined to change for the better and treat the next woman who entered his life with respect. The only thing we can do when something doesn't turn out the way we had hoped or intended is get back up and try again. Please share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section below. It seemed as though Mildred's family had abandoned her as soon as they left her off at the care facility. After 2 years, not one of them visited her, and they seldom spoke to her at all. Thomas, her grandson, was the only one who supported her during it all. She thought Thomas was such a wonderful child. He remained even after everyone else turned their backs on her. Every weekend he would pay her a visit and would give her a call whenever he could. Any day that he called, Mildred's day brightened. Sadly, he wasn't the angel she believed him to be. Mildred suffered from a bad case of dementia, and over the last few years, it had gotten a whole lot worse. It was the reason her family had given up on her, or so she thought. When Thomas came to visit Mildred, he often told her that the family saw her as a burden and that they wanted nothing to do with her. It hurt her deeply, especially after she heard the bitterness in their voices when she called. It seemed like Thomas was the only one who still cared. Thomas also told his grandma that the family wasn't happy about his visits. They were so unhappy about it that they stopped inviting him to family get-togethers. It seemed like he was being treated just as badly as her, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It was just another part of his elaborate web of lies. Thomas's words caused Mildred to become resentful of her family. He was there for her, therefore she felt bad that he was being treated like a stranger. It didn't set right with her at all that it seemed like he was giving up so much of his life to make her happy. On one visit, Thomas even told her that the family had decided to put her in the care home because they expected her to pass away soon. That statement really made her sad. She knew that she probably only had a few years left, but hearing that her children spoke about her in such a way was like a punch to the gut. It suggested that Thomas was following the footsteps of the rest of the family, but her grandson wouldn't stand for it. Instead of abandoning her as they did, he increased the number of visits and phone calls. It was especially clear after conditions started worsening. That was when Mildred started noticing certain things. Every now and then, Thomas would mention that he was having money problems. He claimed that he had lost his job and that he was having difficulty paying his mortgage. That made Mildred feel even worse. She thought it was partly her fault and felt that she needed to do something to help her devoted grandson. Mildred took a few days to consider her options. She wasn't rich, but when everything she had was put together, it would come to a decent amount. She decided it would only be fair for her to give her entire inheritance to Thomas. Her sons didn't deserve it anyway. Where were they for all these years? Thomas was there for her all along. Mildred felt that her family had to be punished for leaving her to die. They even tried to go so far as to try and stop her grandson from visiting her. He was the last person she had left. But what Mildred didn't see was that she was being misled by the only person she trusted. Thomas wasn't so innocent after all, and her sons were only doing what they thought was right. Something disturbed Mildred despite her advanced age and the consequences of her illness. Mildred couldn't help but question whether or not Thomas's assertions were accurate. She reasoned that her dementia could have caused her to make mistakes. Perhaps her boys did arrive, but she chose to ignore it. If only she knew, Mildred had originally planned to split her inheritance between her sons. It would be up to them to share it with their families and decide how much went to each of their children. But after what they put her through, they didn't deserve it. She had made up her mind. She'd give everything to her grandson, as he deserved it more than anyone else. However, there was a slight issue with the will that had been standing for so long. It wasn't so easy to alter the information. When Mildred created her will, things worked differently than they do now. There were different rules and stipulations attached to it, and that would create one major issue that Mildred wanted to avoid. What problem was she trying to avoid? Her sons would be informed of her planned changes. But that wasn't even the worst part. They also had the right to object to them since they were the only people in line that would receive anything. But Mildred hoped they would understand instead of going against her. So she got on the phone and discussed everything with her lawyer. Luckily, he was all too happy to deal with everything. Mildred dreaded what her sons would think of her after they found out, but she would deal with it when it came to that. At least then she would be able to speak her mind. The next day, the documentation was completed, and the attorney notified Mike and Dave, Mildred's sons, of the modifications. As Mildred waited for her boys to call, she was nervous. Though she had anticipated hearing from them, she had not anticipated their response. She was delighted to grant their request for a visit, even if she had not anticipated it. Early the next morning, Mildred got a call from Thomas, and he seemed upset. He found out that his father and uncle would pay her a visit, and he was determined to convince her not to see them. What Mildred thought would be the last time she saw her son, since she wasn't going to let the opportunity slip. Within an hour, Thomas was knocking on her door. Thomas was livid, and he tried to talk Mildred out of seeing her sons, but she was adamant about hearing their side of the story, and that didn't sit too well with her grandson. With a huff, Thomas stormed off, leaving his distraught grandmother on the brink of tears. She had no idea why he was acting the way he did, but she would find out soon enough. Mildred had an hour before her sons arrived, and she took that time to calm herself down. An hour later, Mike and Dave knocked on the door, and for some inexplicable reason, they looked happy and relieved that their mother had allowed them to come. It had contradicted everything Thomas had said to her over the last few months, and she was starting to wonder why had her grandson been lying the entire time. When Mildred brought the subject up, her sons shared a look, and she instantly knew she was being misled. Dave informed her that they wanted nothing more than to visit her, but Thomas informed them that her condition was worsening and that she preferred it if they stayed away. Again, after Mildred heard everything her sons had to say, she was devastated. For the past 2 years, she thought her children wanted nothing to do with her. She spent her time wondering what she had done to deserve this, but now she knew it was all her fault. If she didn't believe Thomas, she could have been with her sons. Because of that, their reunion was bittersweet. Mildred was happy that she got to see her beloved children one last time, but she was also furious about Thomas's deception. The truth was that Mildred was out for revenge. Now that she knew what Thomas wanted, she would make sure he wouldn't get it. But how would she do it? If Mike or Dave left, Mill asked them one last favor. She wanted them to act as if Thomas had gotten his way, and she needed them to stay quiet about what was discussed. Her sons were happy to make her final wish a reality, even though they didn't know what she was planning. They were just happy to have resolved the issue before it was too late. Following her boys' departure, Mildred decided to put the finishing touches on her life's adventure. She corresponded with her kids and grandkids by mail. Though the letter to Thomas was going to be a little different, she still wanted to express her gratitude for the roles they had played in her life. Every deception he believed he had constructed would be destroyed by what she had to say to him. A couple of days later, Dave and Mike got a call from the nursing home. Mildred had passed on the night before, and she wanted them to be the first to know. In his expected, Thomas told everyone that Mildred asked him to arrange the funeral, and his father and uncle were all too happy to let him do it. And on the day of the funeral, Thomas was front and center. He wanted all attention to be on him while he anxiously awaited the call from the lawyer. But the call never came. Instead, the lawyer and a few people from a company Thomas had never heard about arrived at the funeral. They set up a monitor, and suddenly Thomas's lies came crashing down around him. Before her face showed on the large screen, Mildred's voice resounded over the crowd. "For the longest time, I thought you guys wanted nothing to do with me, but now I know it was just a lie fabricated by Thomas." Cries went up throughout the throng. He would face their anger since Mildred had gone over and above to expose her grandson in front of the whole family. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.